Good morning, everyone, wherever you are, whenever you're picking up our service in these unusual times. This morning, this Father's Day, we continue our studies in Ecclesiastes. After Steve's message last Sunday on the awe and the majesty of God, my topic, money and the stuff we buy with it, can seem like a bit of an anticlimax. I think they're related. What so easily distracts us from giving God the time and attention and the reverence that he deserves? Often it's our pursuit of these other things. Solomon understands this. We'll look at what he says and also how he manages this as a father to his own children. Many years ago now, I remember reading through Ecclesiastes and thinking, boy, this old guy sounds really cynical. The Bible reading program that I'm following this year took me back through Ecclesiastes again a few months ago. And I remember thinking, I reckon I know where this bloke's coming from. We change as we grow older. Our perspective on life changes. Not all these changes are improvements. We also learn from the experiences life takes us through along the way. Let me try and illustrate this. Over the years, a number of people have spoken to me about the trials they've had with crook shoulders and shoulder pain. I'm sure I was sympathetic. I hope I was sympathetic. I gained some first-hand experience of shoulder pain a few months ago through an incident, an altercation really, with one of our goats. It happened like this. I was leading Choco, one of our bucks, through to a gate into another paddock. And unbeknown to me, Jaeger, our other buck, was watching closely. Now, Jaeger is really friendly. He has a nice nature and he's quite well bred. I wouldn't say he's the smartest goat in the paddock. That day, Jaeger decided that he was going to try and beat Choco through the gate. I didn't see him coming. He took my feet from under me and I hit the ground. I landed on my right shoulder, which hadn't been the greatest for some time. There is an unwritten law in the universe. I suspect God put it in place right back at creation. And it says that for every decade you add to your life, you lose a significant amount of bounce. Think about our footballers. They're young, they run, they jump, they bowl each other over and they bounce right back up and get on with it. I used to play football. I used to bounce. After 7 decades, there is no bounce. I hit the ground and I stayed on the ground. And as Jaeger came back over to investigate, I said to him, I really wish you hadn't done that, or words to that effect. And here's my point. Talk to me now about the trouble you're having with your shoulder and you'll have my instant sympathy. After nights of broken sleep and numerous trips to the osteopath, I understand shoulder pain now from personal experience. In fact, talk to me about anything at all, and there's a good chance I'll end up telling you about shoulder pain. Experience is a great teacher. But it's not the only teacher. Solomon tells us there are better ways to learn, some things anyway. I've never been bankrupt. I've never been an alcoholic. I've never been homeless. And while I'm sure experience could teach me about these sad and difficult situations, I'm happy to learn about them in some other way. I don't need to be bitten by a snake or a shark or even a spider to learn that snakes and sharks and spiders can sometimes be dangerous. How does someone become an undertaker? Not by dying. How does a man become an obstetrician? I actually consider myself to be something of an authority when it comes to childbirth. I've been there and I've watched Loris do it 3 times. I'm very happy to learn from someone else's experience. And this is a major reason Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes. And he's saying to us especially when it comes to wealth and the things that we buy with our money. I've done it. I've tried it all and it doesn't satisfy. Trust me, don't make the same mistake I made. Learn from my experience. I wonder if we will. This morning I want to ask 3 questions as we consider the dilemma, the temptation we face to expect far too much from the money, our money, and the material things of life. Here's the first question. Why should we listen to Solomon? Let's acknowledge this morning that there are plenty of other voices, and they'll tell us the exact opposite of what Solomon is trying to tell us. You really need this latest phone. Get yourself financially independent, then you'll be set up for life. True happiness depends on the right brand of jeans. It's time for a new cordless drill. You deserve it. And I could go on, and you could add, I'm sure, to this list. There are many other voices, and generally, we like to listen to those voices saying the things that we want to hear. Solomon's message this morning is confronting. Why listen to him? Well, he's certainly qualified to speak about wealth and possessions. Gold is currently worth around $2,470 an ounce. That's just under $80,000 a kilogram, or $80 million a tonne. Each year of his 39-year reign, Solomon received 25 tonnes of gold and heaps of silver and bronze. Solomon inherited great wealth from his father David. He received tributes from all the nations that were under Israel's control, and he received taxes from all his people. Solomon built God's temple in Jerusalem. It took 7 years, and the Bible describes its splendour and the lavish materials used in its construction. Gold everywhere. It took Solomon 12 years to build his own palace. What must that have been like? He had horses and stables and chariots. He had monkeys and apes and peacocks. Anything he wanted, he could buy. Mostly he didn't have to buy all this stuff. He was the king. People simply gave it to him. He had 700 wives. We've heard that previously. Many of these were daughters of kings and princes married to strengthen some political alliances. He had 300 concubines. I'm not even going to go there this morning. In short, if anyone could speak with authority about wealth and the stuff it can buy, Solomon could. He was the wealthiest man of his time, still considered by some today to be the wealthiest of all time. And he says to us, do you know what? It didn't satisfy me. Others have found something similar. Saint Augustine wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." Trying to overcome that inner restlessness with other things is a bit like eating chips when you're thirsty. It will fill up some space. It is never going to quench your thirst. Thirst is designed to take us to the water that is essential for life. In a similar way, God places within us a thirst, a restlessness that only he can satisfy. John D. Rockefeller was the richest man of his time, the early 1900s. He was once asked what it would take to satisfy him. He rather famously replied, "Just a little bit more." This isn't only a problem for the fabulously wealthy. Solomon writes, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income." The Apostle Paul picks this up. "For the love of money is a root of all evil, all kinds of evil," he writes. Some people eager for money, have wandered from their faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. We hear his warning here. Can we see the danger for us today? Those eager for money easily become distracted. And his love from the centre of our lives. They don't simply abandon their love. Rather, they don't abandon their faith. They simply wander from it. They don't really mean to. It just kind of happens. Solomon understands this. He started off close to God. When God asked him what he could do for Solomon, he replied, "Give me wisdom so I can rule your people wisely." He could have asked for wealth. God was so pleased with Solomon's response, he said, "Because you didn't ask for wealth, but asked instead for wisdom, I'll give you both wisdom and wealth." And the wisest man who ever lived also became the wealthiest. And tragically, the very thing God gave Solomon as a bonus gradually overshadowed his first gift and ultimately robbed him of his wisdom. Solomon writes Ecclesiastes with a good deal of regret. "I got it wrong," he tells his readers, "from personal experience and with deep humility and honesty. Don't you make the same mistake I made." He writes with authority. We should listen to him. He writes with compassion. He doesn't want us to fall into the trap he fell into. Are we vulnerable? I've mentioned Solomon and Rockefeller, the richest people of their times. One couple actually had more than Rockefeller, even more than Solomon by comparison. Adam and Eve had it all, created by God in his image, enjoying unbroken fellowship with God in a perfect environment. Just imagine it. Everything they needed, all they could have ever wanted, right there at their fingertips. Work was pleasant and fulfilling. The weather was perfect, no disease, no death, no lockdowns. One day, Satan came to Eve and he whispered to her, "What would it take to really satisfy you?" And Eve looked longingly at the one tree in the garden from which they'd been forbidden to eat. And she said, "Just a little bit more." Are we vulnerable? You bet we are. Second question, how can we avoid the mistake Solomon made? Remember, that's largely why he wrote Ecclesiastes. Let me quickly mention three things, and they all start with the letter G. Firstly, gratitude. One of the esteemed members of our home group loves to remind us that none of us was born with a hip pocket. Solomon wrote something similar. We came into this world with nothing, and we'll leave it the same way. And he notes the good things that we have, the good things we enjoy, are all gifts from God. Now, you might want to say, "Well, I worked hard to earn the things that I have and enjoy," to which Solomon would reply, "Who gave you your strength and a brain? Who gave you the opportunity, the privilege of work? God did. Accept it, accept your lot. Be happy in your toil. This too is a gift from God." We treat a gift very differently from a wage or salary. Wages are an entitlement. We say thank you for a gift. Our second word as an antidote to greed is generosity. Gratitude and generosity go hand in hand. When we're generous, we are saying, in effect, to God, "We're grateful to all that you've given us. We have more than we really need. It is our privilege to share some of your blessing with others." When we're generous, we better reflect God who has made us in his image. Solomon gives us our third word, gladness. Gladness of heart. And this is where it gets a bit tricky. God wants us, he expects us to enjoy the good things he gives us. There's nothing wrong with money and the things we buy with it as such. Paul tells us that it is the love of money that gets us into trouble. Jesus put it very bluntly for us. No one can serve two masters, he said. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. You cannot serve both God and money. Solomon tried it, didn't work for him, and it will not work for us. Can we receive with gladness, with gratitude and generosity, the good things God gives us without allowing them to take over our lives? One last question, and it is a bit confronting. What message are we sending to our children? Let's consider Solomon as an example and a warning to us. What message did he send to his children? Let's be clear, we don't read a lot about Solomon's children apart from Rehoboam. But with 700 wives and 300 concubines, we can be fairly safe in assuming that there were lots of them. Solomon left two messages for his children. He left them his written message, full of wisdom from Proverbs and warnings from his experiences and mistakes in Ecclesiastes. All the way through Proverbs, 27 times in fact, he addresses his words to my son. And at the end of Ecclesiastes, he writes, "Be warned, my son, of adding to the words of the wise." Now, I'm sure he wrote for a wider audience than just his literal children, however many these may have been. But his family would have been included. His written words were his first message to his children. We see his other message in his lifestyle. There was something of a disconnect between the two. Which message would his children take on board? When Solomon died, his son Rehoboam became king. And when Jeroboam came to him on behalf of the people and asked him to lighten the heavy taxes that Solomon had levied against them, Rehoboam consulted his father's advisors. That seemed like a good idea. Here's what they said. If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favourable answer, they will always be your servants. Sounds like good advice. What would Rehoboam do? Israel's future as a nation hung in the balance at this very point. That Rehoboam even went to his mates and asked for their advice shows us where his heart was. Which of Solomon's messages would he follow? Listen to what his mates told him. Tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Sadly, Rehoboam followed their advice. How do you think that went down? Well, we know how it went down. The people revolted, and Jeroboam led most of Israel, 10 tribes, in a breakaway movement that left Rehoboam king of just 2, Judah and Benjamin. And what followed was a disaster for both of these kingdoms. If only Rehoboam had followed his father's written advice. If only Solomon had lived consistently with what he'd written. What message are we sending to our children? What an opportunity we have as parents, as grandparents, as older, mature members of our church to send a strong and consistent message to our young people, because they're hearing a very different message from the world and from their peers. Only God can satisfy the need that he has placed in our hearts. What a challenge to us all to make sure the money we earn and the things we buy with it stay in their proper place. We do that when we give God the awe and the reverence he's entitled to. We do that when we make following Jesus, his example and his teaching, the guiding principle for the whole of our lives. Solomon says to us today, learn from my experience, learn from my mistakes. Don't make the same mistakes yourselves. And Jesus says to us, consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labour or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon, in all his splendour, was dressed like one of these. And he goes on to say a little bit later, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you his kingdom. What a wonderful God we love and serve.